I'm not sitting in this courtroom snickering. I'm not sitting in this courtroom laughing, smiling, and making snide jokes. I'm not. This is horrible. This is painful.
Did you look at that one when you were comparing this processing speed?
Do I have to answer that question, Your Honor?
You have to answer questions. Yes, sir.
Because he was basing Johnny's entire diagnosis just on Amber's word, not on any objective assessment. Hi, I'm Deb Kielmeyer. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist, and I'm continuing this series I've been doing covering the psychiatric aspects and a bit of recap of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation case. So likely this is my last video, as the testimony and closing arguments are all now done and the jury is just deliberating and will come out with a verdict. So since I haven't made a little video in a while, I'm going to start by covering last week. But before I do that, if you like these videos, please like, subscribe, comment, whatever helps me get some action on YouTube. So beginning with last week, there was obviously so much that was covered. There were only a few things that I felt I should mention here for time's sake. If you want like a really in-depth coverage of the trial, obviously you can watch all the videos on the YouTube channel Law and Crime Network, which they have coverage of the entire day, but then they also have like little clips that are really pertinent for each day. So if you're interested in seeing more, you can do that. Or my favorite Instagram page that's been covering the trial is the JD Case, at the JD Case on Instagram, and they do an incredibly thorough job of breaking everything down. So that's a really good resource as well. So anyways, going by what I'm going to cover, last week, day 16, the one thing that stood out to me was Amber stating that her nurse, Erin, lied in the note she wrote about her, specifically about her having mental illness, like the prior history of mental illness where it said things like bipolar disorder, codependence. I think we all remember that. And then she also wrote like a line about how Amber had like a male visitor over. I cover exactly what's said in a previous video, but Amber said it was a lie, which to me as a medical professional is so absurd. Like, what would be the reasoning that Erin would have been incentivized to just make up lies about her in her note? Like, first off, no medical professional even likes writing notes. We try to spend as little of time as possible on them, and we try to write only really important, pertinent things in it. So essentially, if you are like my case in one setting where I'm a solo psychiatrist who works on their own, my notes are really, really brief because I only need to write what I need to know. But in a case more similar to Erin's, when I work on the inpatient setting, my notes are a little more lengthy because I might not be the only person involved in the care of the patient, and other individuals are going to need to see what I was thinking or what I learned so that, they have a reference for what was going on. And that's clearly what Erin is doing. She's writing notes not just for herself, but for other people in her group if they're caring for Amber as well. So to me, it was just so absurd that Amber was just like, Erin lied. Okay, but that's wild. And what would actually be her incentive to lie? Because if people are going to lie, there has to be an incentive. People don't lie for no reason. Amber clearly has incentive to lie about Erin lying. Moving on to day 17, what really stood out to me was this clip of Amber Heard at her deposition. And it's definitely pertinent to things that happen in the case. So I'm going to play this clip so you can see it of Amber at her deposition that took place back in 2016.
I remember sending this because I wanted to tell Johnny or have him told by Jerry or someone who knew him or was close to him. Basically, I didn't want him to find out online that I had or was about to file, or I had already filed for divorce. I wanted him to know verbally. So I was trying to reach him through a third party to tell him. When I say reach, I'm specifically saying I would like him to know information coming from me or coming from Jerry, from me, so that he finds out about the divorce filing or my intention to do so from some other source other than TMZ, which was alerted.
Ms. Hurd,
I love that clip so much. Obviously, you can see that she slipped up and stated essentially that she alerted TMZ and then tried to like wipe her face to distract from it. Okay, Amber. So, and also, you just note her demeanor. There's other videos too. I'm not going to play all of them here. But her demeanor in those depositions, she's just like always nonchalant, like eating snacks and like giggling versus like, you know, her crocodile tears in the current situation. Another thing that stood out to me as a medical professional was Amber discussing that she has a significant amount of scar tissue in her nose and that this is a result of Johnny obviously breaking her nose, as she insinuated. Well, I guess she insinuated that she thought her nose was broken. But, you know, we also know from Erin's notes that Amber has a history of cocaine use disorder, and cocaine use can cause scar tissue in your nose. So it's not just someone breaking your nose. In fact, there's a reasonable explanation we have based upon what we know of her without even considering that. So mostly what happened last week was, besides the things I mentioned, was Amber has every single one of her friends testify on her behalf. These are people that have, you know, incentive for her to win because a lot of them were people who lived free in Johnny's houses and apartments and all of that, got free housing when him and Amber were together. And essentially their financial well-being is tied to Amber's well-being. On the other hand, we had some people testify for Johnny, less so, like on his behalf. I wouldn't say it was friends, though. It was other people, such as there was a pre-recorded deposition from his psychiatrist, Dr. Blaustein. And this psychiatrist, what stood out to me was he reported Johnny has an anxiety disorder. He does not have bipolar. He confirmed the substance use disorders. He also confirmed that Johnny never wanted to get married and expressed some concerns about Amber to him. Moving forward to this week, this was obviously very heavy on the medical professionals, you know, being expert witnesses. We started out with the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Richard Moore. And Dr. Richard Moore is testifying as an expert witness on behalf of Amber's team. Notably, he charges $5,000 per day and is routinely hired by Amber's law firm. So there is a lot of incentive for him to keep making that money from them by, you know, saying what they want him to say. So what stood out to me was he had admitted to not reviewing the deposition of the ortho who actually treated Johnny. Obviously, before I even get to this, you know, he said he didn't think the mechanism of the injury was consistent with a bottle being thrown at it. Instead, it came from, like, you know, punching the wall or the phone or whatever Amber claimed, which I'm not an ortho, and I don't even think it takes one to think that that doesn't make sense and to understand just from the little that we know about the injury that it's much more likely to be from a bottle. Like, just look at the pictures of the finger. So Camille called him out for changing his testimony during this, while he was testifying, that he changed the mechanism of the injury during it. And then what I couldn't help but thinking about during this is when I was a resident, you know, I obviously in psychiatry residency, you cover thousands of consults throughout your time as a resident. In ortho, numerous times, and it was not just me, they did this to other people as well, and I'm pretty sure this is a common thing they do just in America, is they would consult me because they didn't think the patient's mechanism of injury they reported was consistent with the injury, and they were always convinced it was a suicide attempt. First off, like, if someone's denying a suicide attempt and we don't have objective evidence outside of you thinking the mechanism of injury doesn't line up, I can't just like hold that person against their will because you, the ortho, you know, think that it doesn't make sense that they like, you know, fell on scissors or something. But on top of it, I felt that, you know, ortho maybe didn't have like the objective knowledge they thought about like mechanisms of actions of injury, and that really just because it didn't make sense to them doesn't mean it didn't happen that way. And you know, perhaps they need to broaden their perspective of mechanism of injury, like it wasn't as objective as they thought it was. So that was just my thoughts in residency. Okay, but here's what I've been waiting for, and probably the most pertinent reason for me to even be commenting on this trial is so I can comment on the psych stuff. So we had a psychiatrist come and testify as an expert witness on behalf of Amber's team. His name is Dr. David Spiegel, and I actually had heard about him before he testified, and that's because one of my friends, very close friends from residency, who was in the same year as me, and we lived together in residency, she was reviewing like the witness list, and she saw his name on it, and she was like, oh, you know, he was one of my attendings when I was in med school at EVMS, and I actually know multiple people who went to EVMS, Eastern Virginia Medical School, where of course Dr. Spiegel reported that he did teaching there. So I know multiple people who know him, and they all had like very nice things to say about him. They said he was eccentric and super quirky, and that he was going to be fun to watch on stand, but that he also was a great teacher, and that he really went out of his way to help, you know, medical students or residents get published, and that he was just like a really cool guy. So they had good things to say about him, but I noticed he was on the list for Amber's team, so I was like, not going to go over well. And before I get into my impression of him and what he said and things like that, one thing that stood out to me that was a big deal on social media is people were bringing up that he had a couple of bad patient reviews. Now, as a psychiatrist or any physician would know, this does not mean that someone is a bad physician. Especially psychiatrists, of all people, we're very, very likely to get bad reviews even if we're good because of what we deal with. One of the things is committing people against their will to the hospital, like who's going to like someone who did that? And two, you know, some of our patients die by suicide, and family members can really blame you for that, even though suicide is not preventable. So, you know, there were a couple of bad reviews. Another reason a patient might write you a bad review is if you don't give them a scheduled substance that they want. So, you know, I would never judge someone off their patient reviews. I just think it's completely unreliable. So I wanted to put that out there. So moving on to what my impression of him was. My first impression of him was that he was definitely eccentric. I did think he came off pretty egotistical, but honestly, most academic physicians do. Like some don't, but academia, it pays low. People have to go into it for the prestige. Obviously not everyone. There are certainly exceptions. But the vast majority, if you're going to go for a job with lower pay, you know, more strenuous working conditions, higher patient loads, a lot of people are only willing to do that because they like the prestige that comes along with it. Like if you talk about my credentials at the beginning of this, if I was on the stand, I wouldn't look impressive at all. It would be like, okay, she went to med school, cool. She went to residency, cool. Not Ivy League, and now she just like does her own thing. So, but the thing about taking your own path is that you usually make more money, you have better working conditions, but you don't really get any prestige. So that's just to give some of the full picture of what goes on in academic medicine versus medicine that's not academic. And, you know, it was really hard. Part of me wanted to like him because of what I'd heard about him from friends. Part of me didn't want to like him because he's on defending Amber, and by now I am very strongly pro Johnny. But I couldn't ignore how he came off quite egotistical, and this became really apparent because he was repeatedly referencing like his book or books, and as well as his publications. And I think, you know, perhaps he's just not aware of how he comes off to others, but it doesn't come off well. And another thing that stood out for him is physicians who do forensic work, especially forensic psychiatrists, which we are the ones who do the most forensic work of like any subspecialty, if you think about it. I mean, just think about how pertinent was this case. You were seeing more psych people than anyone else. They're known for being like wealthy and attractive and really well put together. I mean, the wealthy comes from, look at what they're paid, right, to do that type of work. But the attractive and well put together, usually people who want to take the stand and are going to care a lot about their appearance. And also, if you are going to get hired as an expert witness frequently, you know, they're going to want someone who looks more put together, speaks more sophisticated, things like that are all important. So, you know, he was a bit disheveled, and it did stand out a little from the typical forensic psychiatrist. I mean, obviously, you can just compare this to then the psychiatrist who later did the rebuttal to this. And another thing I wanted to comment on is there was a lot of, you know, weight placed on how long that person had been practicing. Like, oh my gosh, this psychiatrist has been in practice for 30 years. Clearly, they are so experienced and know everything. But I will say, you know, it's different in every field, but I'm certainly not impressed by someone's years of experience in psychiatry. I do find that a lot of the younger psychiatrists are more like with it. So I think it's one of these things like, you know, I don't notice physicians who went to an Ivy League school or an Ivy League residency being any better, and I don't notice someone with more years of experience being any better. Of course, you could say I'm biased because I don't have any of those, but that's just my observation. And as far as Dr. Spiegel's background, he reported that, you know, he does inpatient consults, outpatient. I actually do a mix of all these things as well, a little differently set up than his, but I do personally work in all these fields presently. So, of course, anyone in our situation sees a lot of substance abuse, a lot of people who are involved in intimate partner violence, as they say. And just like Dr. Spiegel said, we see more of this on inpatient, right? Because those are the people who, you know, their life isn't together enough to be consistent with outpatient care. So they're showing up in crisis to get inpatient psychiatric care. So he stated that Johnny has behaviors that are consistent with someone with substance use disorder. Yes, Johnny himself was very open throughout this whole trial about his issues with substance use. And then that he presents with behaviors consistent with an intimate partner violence perpetrator as well. No, hard disagree. You know, and even with the substance abuse, it's like, are you ignoring the fact that there's evidence that Amber is a very heavy substance user? Clearly you are. So then where I started getting really annoyed is when he was talking about Johnny's cognition. So he honed in on how Johnny failed this 3 of 3 recall test. So part of a psychiatric exam, and I don't do this part on every single person, by the way. Some psychiatrists do. I think they just have like poor judgment and can't really judge patients appropriately. Because like if I meet a 19-year-old who's presenting for suicidality, do I need to like make sure they're remembering things and that they're oriented? Like, no. If we're, you know, it's such a small percentage. So then we have Dr. Spiegel commenting on Johnny's cognition. So he really honed in on how Johnny failed this 3 of 3 recall test. So to reiterate, a 3 of 3 recall test is when you are going to do a mini mental status exam on a patient and you give them 3 words to remember. And then about 3 minutes or so later, you ask them to recall those 3 words for you. Usually, I don't do this on every patient. I do it on a patient where I suspect there's something wrong with their cognition. Okay? And when I heard this, I was like, that's odd that he didn't remember 3 out of 3, because typically when someone remembers 0 out of 3, like they have severe dementia or something like that, but we can tell Johnny doesn't have severe dementia. There's no way he could be as with it as he is during this trial and then in movies and then in interviews as he is if he was someone who truly had a hard time remembering 3 words after 3 minutes. And that just points out that you always need context, right? And it was just a little interesting to me that this was the only thing objectively that he had to judge Johnny's cognition on, but that he was, so focused on it like it was the end-all be-all. And then he really focused as part of this in on how Johnny has an earpiece in during movies. But Johnny actually explained this previously during the trial, saying that he listens to music while filming in his earpiece. So, would someone really hire a guy whose cognition was so poor they needed all their lines fed to them? Like, that would be a lot of work. Once someone is having issues like that, they get their time in Hollywood is over. So it just didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So then another way that Dr. Spiegel said that he was judging Johnny's cognition is he claimed that based on watching Johnny on the stand and depositions, he could tell that his processing speed is slow. Okay, can you really tell that? Sometimes people might have various reasons why they're answering things slow on purpose, or it might be part of their personality. You can't just say, oh, because someone is answering things slowly, their processing speed is slow. We all have different mannerisms. And ultimately, he states that he's confident that Johnny has some level of a cognitive disability. Okay. So to me, this was all examples of Dr. Spiegel's bias. It became quite clear that he was really only considering Amber's side of things. Not that I would expect anything else from an expert witness on her side. And the thing is, I didn't disagree with his explanations on the stand in regards to descriptions of mental health issues or statistics. I just disagreed with his application to Johnny. So another thing that sort of bothered me is he was claiming that all of Amber's symptoms are a result of her surviving abuse. And this was just more evidence to me that he was really ignoring all the evidence against her. It's interesting, too, that every single thing he said about Johnny, we could apply to Amber. It just depends who you are believing. Because if you're talking about, like, someone's issues being a symptom of intimate partner violence, well, if we believe Johnny that he was a victim of Amber, then we could believe that all of his symptoms are from that. Or, for example, if we look at the evidence that Amber was actually abusing substances. So you can easily flip this. Or, even the combos of substances. We have a lot of evidence that she was on the same combos. So ultimately, he ends up saying that Johnny has narcissism. Well, first he kept trying to claim he was just referencing narcissistic traits. But then he said that, he could give him a preliminary diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. And he went through his evidence for this, and it was really just, in my opinion, Amber's lie, Amber's lie, Amber's lie, Amber's lie. So it was like, you're basing your diagnosis of MPD for Johnny just based upon Amber's statements. Okay. So I had written down all my reasoning that I don't believe that Johnny has MPD, but luckily, his team's expert witness psychiatrist the next day went on to steal all the words out of my mouth. So it's not even necessary for me to say these things. Another thing that stood out to me about Dr. Spiegel was he very confidently said perpetrators don't seek therapy. It's less likely for sure, but as I said in my earlier videos, narcissists love being validated. So if they can find a therapist that's just going to validate everything for them, they'll keep going. And I guess the reason that it bothered me that he didn't review anything on Amber and didn't care to is because if someone reached out to me, a very lowly individual, to be an expert witness psychiatrist, you know, I would be reviewing some basic internet information about the individuals in the case, and I would make sure I agreed with the person I was testifying for. So if someone had reached out to me, I would have said no, because at the point that they were reaching out for expert witness psychiatrists in this case, I was already aware that there was a lot of evidence that, you know, Amber had made up these allegations and that Johnny was the victim. Not that I really expect an academic psychiatrist to know that, because a lot of them are living in their own world, and I'm sure Dr. Spiegel is very much in his own world. So now I'm going to review my favorite clip of Dr. Spiegel. It's been going around on the internet, and let's watch it.
Just a second ago, I may have said that I misspoke. I apologize, I misspoke.
Okay. Because you know you can't compare pirates to sworn testimony, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But you can, but as an aside, you can judge someone's processing speed at any time. Like I'm judging yours right now, you're judging mine. We all judge processing speed as a baseline because of what we know about each other. I would say your processing speed right now is not slow. So, I mean, we're judging processing speed. I'm just saying to you.
Yeah. But no, any of Mr. Depp's other portrayals in movies, did that affect your analysis of processing speed?
Only I've seen him interact on interviews, and that was it.
Right.
When he wasn't in movies.
Right. But Willy Wonka doesn't matter to you? You see him in that movie, Charlie and Chocolate Factory? Did you look at that one when you were comparing his processing speed?
Do I have to answer that question, Your Honor?
You have to answer questions. Yes, sir.
No, you'll be happy to know I didn't see Willy Wonka I didn't see 21 Jump Street when it happened, or whatever it was about. No, I did not.
All right.
Okay, so before I watched his whole testimony, I just saw the clip that was going all around the internet. I was, you know, doing all the mouth movements. And my first thought was something called Tardive Dyskinesia. So Tardive Dyskinesia is unfortunately a side effect that is not common these days, but it's a permanent side effect from being on high-dose first-generation antipsychotics for a very long time. Like for someone who has very serious schizophrenia, and they could develop these mouth movements and stuff. That's why now we almost 100% of the time, people put people on second-generation antipsychotics because they can't really cause that. Obviously, you know, well-known, reputable psychiatrists, there's just no way you could have schizophrenia and be on these, you know, hardcore antipsychotics to the point where you develop tardive dyskinesia. If you watch his whole testimony, it's clearly like it only happens this one time, and it's some anxious, it's just some anxious mannerisms. But it is sort of amusing, I will say. Multiple psychiatrists messaged me the video, and it was all mostly in jest, but we were like, tardive dyskinesia. So at the very least, it's very odd, right? But some other things happened outside of that. You know, he started talking about Adderall. He stated a 45 milligram daily dose is way too high. He states that instant release isn't even approved for adults. Well, this man clearly does not have many ADHD patients. And, you know, I wouldn't expect anything else from an academic psychiatrist who primarily treats adults. 45 milligrams is not an abnormal dose. Not even for instant release Adderall. Yes, it's definitely on the higher end for sure, but Up to 60 is not uncommon. Over that would definitely be uncommon. Still happens though. And here's the thing. He spends all this time arguing that Johnny has a substance use issue. Okay, but Johnny's admitted to that. No one is arguing otherwise. And so, yes, he might be on a combination of Adderall, Seroquel, gabapentin, which is a combination you wouldn't really see, I agree, outside of someone who's suffering from substance use issues. But why are we so fixated on that? We already know Johnny has a history of substance use disorder and still struggles, not with opiates, but maybe with other substances. Okay, so now the Goldwater rule comes up. Now, I actually discussed the Goldwater rule in my very first video about this trial because I knew if I didn't, I would have tons of people like, oh my God, you're speculating things, you're talking about things, the Goldwater rule, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, if you want my opinion on the Goldwater rule, you can click back to my original YouTube video. I won't recap the whole viewpoint and history of it here, but I will make certain statements. So, you know, what happens essentially is Johnny's team comes forward and in their cross exam and, well, first his own team brings it up and he has opportunity to state why he doesn't think he's breaking the Goldwater rule. So my one sentence summary of the Goldwater rule here will be that the Goldwater rule is a rule by the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. It is simply an ethical guideline that was made when a man named Goldwater ran for president in the 60s, and this magazine did like a survey and they got like all these psychiatrists to say that he was like psychotic and crazy and not fit to be president, and it like destroyed his chance of you know, even being nominated, I think. So this rule is touted by people on the internet all the time to gatekeep psychiatrists, as well as like even psychiatrists not understanding it and using it to gatekeep other psychiatrists. Like, oh, you can't talk about that because you're breaking Goldwater rule. Well, first off, it's not a law, and I'm not a member of the American Psychiatric Association because I don't give a fuck about their Goldwater rule. Okay, I'm just gonna say, no one was trying to gatekeep the orthos involved in this trial or the psychologists, just psychiatrists, because of some rules some organization made. So I'm very heavily on Dr. Spiegel's side about, like, you know, I guess not caring about the Goldwater rule. Now, granted, Dr. Spiegel's a fellow of the APA, in the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. So if you're a fellow in the American Psychiatric Association, you need to be following their guidelines, right? But he still thinks he isn't, which, once again, I'm biased. I'm like, I don't, like, number one, I don't really think he is, but number two, I don't care. So he explains why he's not breaking it. His big reason was Johnny refused to do an evaluation with him, so all he could look at was, you know, the public stuff or the private stuff from the lawyers. And then he said his big reason was, if this is breaking the Goldwater rule, then you would, like, not be able to have expert witnesses ever. And the reason I agree with him in that regard is just because I think we just need to stop gatekeeping psychiatry. Like, psychiatrists should be able to share their opinions. Why do I have to keep my expertise all to myself so that idiots on TikTok think they know more about mental health than me instead of just like educating the public? And some of the best ways to educate the public is not by talking about theoretical people that exist out there somewhere. It's about like things, people that they know and see. So that's my opinion. And one thing I want to make clear, because they always talk about, oh, you're a member of this thing, woohoo, you have like a high position in this organization. So all you have to do to become a member of the American Psychiatric Association, just as an example, because they're all the same, is you have to be a psychiatrist and you have to pay a pretty high yearly fee of like, you know, I don't know, it might be like $500 for an attending. It's something high. But, you know, it's not like they're looking at any qualifications. Like, you could be a psych resident, but likely you just have to have some type of training completed. And then you just throw money at them and they let you join the organization. It's, you know, these places are mostly invested in making money, so they don't want to make things too hard to join them. So when it's like, oh, someone's a member of like 10 organizations, that's not impressive to me. Okay, you pay 10 different fees, congrats. So Dr. Spiegel, part of his other excuse is that he says the Goldwater rule was made for politicians specifically. I don't know if I specifically agree with that, because it definitely mentions like public figures, and I know that's what Johnny's team retorted with. But even then, there were a bunch of psychiatrists that I agree with who tossed Goldwater's rule out the window during Trump's reign. Like, they felt this man is a malignant narcissist and I need to speak out about it. And once again, I'm saying I personally disagree with Goldwater, because I don't think psychiatrists should be gatekept from sharing their really important knowledge with people, with humans. Like, we should be able to share this knowledge. Other physicians get to share their knowledge. Why can't we? So then, moving on to the next day, day 21, we have Dr. Shaw come in. Mostly he speaks on the Goldwater rule, but essentially he is the expert witness psychiatrist on Johnny's side, and his only purpose of coming in is as a rebuttal for the things that Dr. Spiegel said. So I will comment, he had a much more typically professional demeanor. And of course, since this is a huge part of their argument, he thinks that Dr. Spiegel violated the Goldwater rule. And, he gave a lot of reasoning for that. He talked about how, you should only really speak about people that you evaluated, and if you don't, then you should clarify, like, I didn't evaluate this person, so I can't say a diagnosis with any certainty, and I can't really speculate, but these are some things that could be consistent with this diagnosis, which obviously is what I try to do in my videos here, and what a lot of people who speak about these things try to do, because the reality is I do try to obey the Goldwater rule, even though I hate it. Just because, people really come down hard on you. There's no legal repercussions, because it's just the American Psychiatric Association, but it's sort of annoying to deal with people, so you try to follow the rules. And if I didn't make it clear, still hate the Goldwater rule. So he said that Dr. Spiegel's opinions were unreliable, which obviously I agree with. Because he was basing Johnny's entire diagnosis just on Amber's word, not on any objective assessment. So I really agreed with his rebuttal. He really went hard after Dr. Spiegel, saying that Johnny had a cognitive deficit. For example, retorting to the failing of the 303 recall. And actually, he said that Johnny remembered 1 out of 3. Obviously, that's still an issue. But he stated, which is sort of similar to the notes I had that I erased, because I was like, he's saying everything exactly like I would have said, so I'll just reiterate what he says. But he says, the mini mental status exam, it's like taking a temperature. Something can be abnormal about it, but you don't know the reason for that abnormality. And he mentions that if you suspect any cognitive deficit, you send someone for neuropsych testing to give you more information about the deficit and the reason, which I actually mentioned in a previous video. I said, for cognitive deficits, that's the only thing that I really think like psychological testing is really important for. And absolutely, if I had a concern about someone having a cognitive deficit in the outpatient setting, I would send them to get neuropsych testing to give me more information. And, he really harped on how Dr. Spiegel said he could state all these things about Johnny with a degree of medical certainty. He said you couldn't state that. And I agree. So I thought, his whole rebuttal to Dr. Spiegel was really great, even though I still hate the Goldwater rule. So then we have our last day of testimony. It's day 22, and it starts with a very, very brief appearance by Kate Moss, who states that Johnny never pushed her down the stairs. All that happened was that she slipped down the stairs on her own and he helped her. So, once again, we have evidence that Amber's a liar and that, Johnny has never abused anyone else. Then, next, we have Dr. Curry back on the stand. She gives a rebuttal against Dr. Hughes. Going back to things that I covered in my last video, she explains that none of the testing was done appropriately. She confirms that 8 were just checking off symptoms, which I thought. That's what I said in my previous video. She said these were not appropriate for a forensic setting. And she said that Dr. Hughes left out test results that confirmed the picture that Dr. Curry painted of Amber. She also pointed out that Dr. Hughes didn't do all of CAPS 5. She said out of the 12 tests she did, only 2 were appropriate for the forensic setting. She reports the malingering test that Dr. Hughes used is specifically for psychosis and doesn't work for diagnoses like PTSD. She points out that PTSD is the most fake diagnosis in civil court. Duh. And, what I want to point out is that in the normal outpatient setting, no one's trying to malinger PTSD. You don't have any motivation to. So in the outpatient setting, everyone you see who is expressing symptoms of PTSD legitimately has PTSD. So then Johnny Depp comes back on stand, and what stood out the most to me is, they asked him about him taking or commented on the 8 to 10 MDA pills, and he said, if I did that, I'd probably be dead, which once again is exactly what I said in my last video. I said, if someone took that many pills, they would very likely have serotonin syndrome, which requires ICU care pretty urgently to survive. And he also, in his last, taking the stand, he did finally report abuse from Amber, which is something I don't believe he clarified before this. So after this, we have a gentleman from TMZ take the stand, which made maybe the best, little clip of everything, which I will play here.
Okay, this case is being televised, right?
I am aware that there are cameras.
And so this gets you your 15 minutes of fame, doesn't
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
it? I can ask that question.
Overruled.
So I stand to gain nothing from this. I'm actually putting myself kind of in a target of TMZ, a very litigious organization, and I'm not seeking any 15 minutes here. Though you're welcome to speculate. I could say the same thing by taking Amber Heard as a client for you.
A little argumentative, don't you think?
Oh, hardly. I find that to be purely logical. Thank you.
He's my favorite, hands down. I love him. If I was on stand, that's the type of shit I would say. But, say it like you see it, right? So next, we have an orthosurgeon from Johnny's side. Once again, I have to say the difference is so apparent in the difference in professionalism and demeanor of the people on Johnny's side versus Amber's side. And this, Ortho comes in, he essentially says that the mechanism of Johnny's injury that Johnny reported is consistent with the injury, which makes sense to me. He even points out how, if you were punching something, you wouldn't get an injury to the tip of your finger because your hand's like this. He also pointed out that specifically the way the finger was cut would be from a sharp laceration, like from glass, which I think we could all see. It never made sense that he would somehow lose the tip of his finger while punching the wall. Next up, we have Dr. Hughes back on the stand again, spewing the same story we've heard all over again. Her rebuttal to Dr. Curry's rebuttal is that, there are so many people with PTSD who are high functioning. I actually do agree with that, but do you know what people with high functioning PTSD are not doing? Seeking the limelight. That's not something someone with severe PTSD does. They are definitely, trying to function as well as they can in this world, and many of them are very high functioning, but they're not trying to seek the limelight. Well, not in this way. And then she goes under the cross exam. My favorite thing was when they pulled out the PTSD manual and then called her out for not following the instructions. It says that she was supposed to do the CAPS 5 as part of her diagnosis and she didn't do it. Then they point out that, a lot of the tests were supposed to be done looking at symptoms in the past year, which I didn't care as much. The other stuff was all stuff that Curry had pointed out. But I really liked when they pulled out the PTSD manual and were it says here you're supposed to do the CAPS 5. So then our last person to take the stand is Amber. Wanted the last word. So there's a lot of speculation that Johnny's team put him back on the stand just because they knew that Amber would want to have the last word, and that because Amber's team had way less time left, they could not do as much with anyone on the stand, whereas Johnny's lawyers had saved a lot of time up towards the end by not putting stupid witnesses on the stand, and therefore they had a lot of time for arguments. So, arguments, cross-exam, but we all know what it really is. So Amber's testimony starts out by, she's crying, she's saying people have been threatening to put her baby in a microwave, which is somewhat familiar. And then she's talking about how her PTSD is so bad, everyone essentially has to walk on eggshells around her, which sounds so unhealthy. Get some help, girl, if that's actually the case, because that's not healthy. She's talking about how she wakes up screaming in the middle of the night. I mean, once again, we're talking about how some people exaggerate their symptoms of PTSD, like that's what Dr. Curry kept saying. Well, it sounds very exaggerated to me right now. I have plenty of patients with PTSD. They don't tell me they're waking up screaming in the middle of the night. Okay? Maybe if you have an acute trauma, not like 6 years later. So then she's like, I'm not sitting in this courtroom laughing, smiling, making snide jokes. Well, we have plenty of, still shots that disagree of you in the courtroom. Okay, so now I'm going to show a little clip that stood out. But really, I would say if you watch anything, watch Amber's final testimony. On Crime Network, YouTube, you can either do the live feed of the whole day and scroll to when Amber starts, which is towards the end, or you can watch all the little clips that cover her whole testimony because it was so good. So I'm going to show you one now.
From what I've survived, I'm not sitting in this courtroom snickering. I'm not sitting in this courtroom laughing, smiling, and making snide jokes. I'm not. This is horrible. This is painful. And this is humiliating for any human being to go through. And perhaps it's easy to forget that, but I'm a human being. And even though Johnny promised that I deserve this and promised he'd do this, I don't deserve this. I want to move on.
I want to feel bad because you want to believe someone who's stating something as heinous as what she's stating. But I just don't believe her, and it's such bad acting that I just want to laugh the whole time I watch her, which I sort of feel bad about because, I don't want to laugh at anyone talking about abuse, except I don't believe that she was abused. I believe that she abused Johnny, okay? So next up, let's look at where she really seals the deal for herself. It's right at the end of her testimonies. This is in the last few minutes of all of the testimonies because we know that she went last, right? So let's start it.
Take a picture of. Did you?
I know how many people will come out and say whatever for him. That's his power. That's why I wrote the op-ed, is I was speaking to that phenomenon. How many people will come out in support of him and will fall to his power? He is a very powerful man, and people love currying favor with powerful men.
Currying
and I know
favor
that
and
firsthand. I've
risking
lived
jail
it.
time for committing perjury?
Excuse me? I didn't hear your
You
question.
didn't hear
Excuse
my
me?
question?
Ms. Vasquez, if you do mind,
Curry-
please just repeat the question. I didn't hear you.
Curry favor and commit perjury in this courtroom?
I have
For
seen
a
people
powerful
do this.
man?
I have seen people do this time and time again. That's why I wrote the op-ed.
You didn't expect.
Okay, so as you can see in this video, she confirms that she wrote the op-ed because she essentially didn't like the positive attention that Johnny Depp gets. Let's remember what this defamation case is about. Essentially, all Johnny needs to prove to win this defamation case is that, she wrote this about him with ill intent, with false allegations. And she's already sort of putting it out there that she wrote this with ill intent. So the only other thing the jury needs to believe to side with Johnny is that these allegations are false. So she really sort of put the nail in her coffin with going back up on stand one last time and getting decimated by Camille. Once again, if you watch any part of this, you want to go on Law and Crime Network and you want to watch Amber's final testimony on the final day, day 22. You can either watch the live feed and skip to when Amber starts, or you can watch the little clips that they put on there of all of her stuff. So then the final day was today, which was just closing arguments, and instructions from the judge about how the jury is supposed to decide their verdict. And it's pretty interesting. I would suggest watching it too. If I watch anything from this trial, I would watch Amber's final testimony, and then I would watch essentially the closing statements from Johnny's lawyers, all the rebuttals. I'm not gonna lie, I skipped over the parts from Amber's team. I didn't want to hear it. But, we'll see what happens. I really hope that the jury sees that Johnny was victimized by Amber and that they do award him money, because he has lost out on tens of millions of dollars in movies. He's lost out on all the money it costs to pay his law team. He's had his mental health severely impacted. And the reality is, no matter the outcome of this case, just the fact that he was involved on it is always going to scar his name. Even if he gets awarded the $50 million and the jury decides that, he's in the right and Amber's in the wrong, I think that his career is always going to bear the consequences of this. And there are some people that are not going to want to associate with him. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I will be making more videos. I don't know if I'll do the exact same thing where I give you a psych perspective on something going on with the public, but I have many, many things that I can share, and I will certainly be back. So thank you for watching.